Okay, Allison, I suppose we can let people in through the waiting room. Okay, hello. Looks like people are trickling in through the waiting room, and I'm glad to see you all. My name is Brendan Stone. I'm with the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, and I want to welcome you all to a press conference called Course Correction on Canada-China Relations, and also a special Chinese New Year greetings to all of our friends in the Chinese Canadian community. So I am the co-chair of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and co-host of our radio program, Unusual Sources, which is making its 2022 return on February 9th. Now, contact information for the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War will be posted shortly in the chat once it is opened, including information on how to donate to support our work. So as the title for today's press conference suggests, the purpose of today's press conference, which is being held on this day that Parliament resumes in Ottawa, is to encourage the Trudeau government to have a reset and restore good relations with the People's Republic of China. Now, since December 1st, 2018, the day Meng Wanzhou, the chief financial officer of Huawei, was arrested by the Trudeau government at Trump's request, the Canada-China relations have been in a downward spiral. Our coalition was deeply involved in the Cross Canada campaign to free Meng, and we hoped that the Trudeau government would use that opportunity of that prisoner swap that saw Meng return to China and the two Michaels return to Canada as an opportunity to patch up relations with China. But this hoped for reset of relations did not occur, and instead, the government of Canada added new irritants into the mix. These irritants include Justin Trudeau's mean-spirited diplomatic boycott, as it was called, of the Beijing Olympics, the continuing prohibition on Huawei Canada's participation in Canada's 5G rollout, the Conservative Party's Motion 56 to accuse China of a genocide of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, and the Canadian saber rattling in the Far East. So today we are holding this press conference to deal specifically with these issues and officially to launch two petitions. The first is an Action Network petition to allow Huawei Canada to continue to participate in Canada's 5G rollout. And the second petition is a parliamentary petition concerning AUKUS, the military pact involving the USA, UK, and Australia. So before I start introducing the presenters, I just want to set out the agenda a bit for today. We're going to have 4 presenters speaking for about 5 minutes each, and the Zoom chat will be enabled once the first speaker starts. So we're opening up that chat. We're just going to ask you to please be respectful to others. If the chat turns out to be a distraction, we're going to have to remove disrespectful people or close it down for a time. But at the end of the presentations, we will open the question and answer period. First, with questions from members of the media. So we're going to prioritize members of the media who want to pose questions personally to the speakers. So please list your media organization, I guess say your media organization when you pose a question. And if there's time, which there should be, we will take questions from the general audience. Just for your convenience, this meeting is being recorded and it's going to be available for review at our website, hcsw.ca, and at our Facebook page in a few days. So we have activated the transcript, subtitles, closed captioning for this event on Zoom. So you might want to make sure that they're activated on your end if you wish to see those closed captioning subtitles. So I guess we want to get to it. And our first speaker today is Yves Engler, who I hope you are all familiar with. He's been dubbed Canada's version of Noam Chomsky and one of the most important voices on the Canadian left, in the mold of I.F. Stone, part of that rare but growing group of social justice critics unafraid to confront Canada's self-styled myths, ever insightful Chomsky-styled iconoclast, and a leftist gadfly. Yves Engler has 12 published books. We've launched many of them here in Hamilton, of course. His latest is Stand on Guard for Whom? A People's History of the Canadian Military. Now, Yves is going to be discussing Trudeau's so-called diplomatic boycott and other matters that are causing friction between Canada and China. And the link to our open letter to Prime Minister Trudeau regarding this diplomatic boycott will appear in the chat shortly. The sponsors of this open letter to the Prime Minister include the Cross Canada Campaign to Free Meng Wanzhou, the Canadian Peace Congress, Canada-China Council for Cooperation and Development, Global Peace Alliance, Regina Peace Council, Mobilization Against War and Occupation, Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, Canada-China Friendship Promotion Association, and China Solidarity Committee. And also these individuals, Tamara Lawrence, Bruce Katz, Hala Ibrahim, Mark Hager, Larry Waslin, Charles Posa McFadden, and Karen Howell McFadden. So that's a big petition. We hope you all get into it. And of course, on this matter and related issues, we want to hear from Yves Engler. So please go ahead, Yves.
Thanks for that. Thanks for initiating this to the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and initiating the letter. It's I think quite embarrassing of the Trudeau government to have sort of sadly followed along on this what they call a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics, which I don't know exactly what that means, because we know that there are US officials that are going to end up going, and of course the athletes and whatnot. I think that the first thing we need to look at is that, or a couple pieces of trying to kind of get our heads around this, is that in 2010, there was a big campaign around no Olympics on stolen native land in Vancouver and Whistler. Of course, we know that is unceded territory. There was a lot of people criticizing the holding of the Olympics on that unceded territory. In Beijing, there's no claims that is stolen land that I'm aware of. So I think that's one element of when we look at this question. The Chinese government didn't have any diplomatic boycott of the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, Whistler, again on unceded Indigenous land. Additionally, we should remember that in 2008, there was a whole bunch of Canadian politicians and Canadian officials that were talking about the Summer Games being the Genocide Olympics, because supposedly what China was doing with regards to Sudan and Darfur. So this is not new, right? This is the second effort at just repackaging things. It's a new, what the supposed genocide element is a new packaging, but this is not new. And the Canadian government following along, the vast majority of the world is not going along with this. Even in the Globe and Mail on Saturday, they quoted the French President Macron basically mocking the position of the Canadian, American Five Eyes governments that have done this so-called diplomatic boycott. And this gets to a little, important part of the Canadian policy towards China, which is this Five Eyes supposed intelligence apparatus, but that is really kind of pushing Canadian policy on China, an aggressive policy on China. And this is basically a group of the former British colonies, the European settler states, with, of course, Mother England, the countries that have really, ruled the world over the past couple centuries. This is what's driving Canadian policy. This is what Canada's aligned with in this new effort to try to embarrass the Chinese government. And there's many facets to this policy. Obviously, you could spend days and weeks discussing different elements of it, but a couple, right? We have Canadian naval vessels patrolling in the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, back in October, HMCS Winnipeg with a US destroyer, provocative maneuver. Earlier in the year, another provocative maneuver. Who wants this? What is this serving? Why stoke tensions? This is how far from Canadian territorial waters do Canadian naval vessels have to go before we understand ourselves as being the aggressive player in this? Another issue that is kind of goes to this ideology within Canadian foreign policy of domination and we have the right to patrol the world or control the world, is the recent brouhaha around Xinjiang Mining purchasing Neolithium, a Canadian company that extracts lithium. And the opposition parties have gone hard on this issue over the past month or so, wanting a national security review on this question because a Chinese company purchased a Canadian listed, Toronto Stock Exchange listed and Vancouver-based firm. But the minerals are in Argentina. We are pushing for a big national security review of minerals that are, thousands and thousands of kilometers from Canadian territory. And basically, Canadian politicians are saying that the Canadian government should block a Chinese company from accessing minerals that are in Argentina. This is the extent to which the anti-China hysteria has taken over Canadian political life, that there's, from Charlie Angus and the NDP to Aaron O'Toole in the Conservatives, they are making a big fuss about a Chinese company getting control or purchasing minerals that exist in Argentina. Now, certainly there are many legitimate complaints towards the Chinese government. I'm guessing that of the 1.4 billion Chinese people, every different person has different opinions about different elements of government life. Too much coal, too many billionaires seem to be important criticisms. But this whole business of boycotting the election or boycotting the Olympics on the grounds of the treatment of Uyghurs, Muslims, is too much. This is led by the US government that has literally killed millions of Muslims, with Canada in tow, right? In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Libya, in Syria, over the past 2 decades. And we are to believe that this government that continues, our government, that supports Israel's onslaught on Gaza, the 2 million primarily Muslims in Gaza, we are to believe that these governments are all concerned about China's mistreatment of Uyghur Muslims, and that's why they are boycotting the Olympics, this so-called diplomatic boycott Olympics. This is just is beyond. This is beyond believable. This is ridiculous. If it wasn't for the extent of the anti-China hysteria and the ignorance of Canadian US foreign policy, this would just be laughed at. And I'll just end quickly because today is actually an important date that almost no one recognizes to understand a bit of this. Today is January 31st. 19 years ago today, the Canadian government brought American officials, French officials, Organization American States officials to a meeting just outside of Ottawa where they discussed overthrowing Haiti's elected government, putting the country under UN trusteeship, and recreating the Haitian military. That was reported on March 15th, 2003. 1 year later, on February 29th, that happened. Elected Haitian president overthrown by US, French, Canadian troops. Thousands of Haitian elected officials forced from office. Haiti was under a UN trusteeship. The country has not recovered until today. So when we're looking at this question of making sense of Canada's diplomatic boycott and the moral high ground that goes along with this diplomatic boycott, we should look at Canada's role 19 years ago today in planning the overthrow of elected government and all the horrors that came with that policy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yves, for that insightful presentation. I can see why the other panelists wanted you to go first, and we talked about that in the pre-meeting. Yves helped out a lot here because we are trying to make one major point here, which is that we have two petitions and an open letter going on right now on a variety of subjects. And Yves has really fixated and concentrated on one of those. So please keep that in the back of your minds. We have two petitions and an open letter, as well as other initiatives. And you can read more about that in the newsletter that we're going to post probably today on the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War website front page at hcsw.ca. So if there are questions for Yves from any members of the media, and I know people are excited about his presentation, I would just ask that you save those questions for the question and answer period. You'll be able to raise your hand via Zoom and so on. So our second presenter is Ken Stone, treasurer of the coalition here, who we all know, and one of the organizers of the Cross Canada campaign to free Meng Wanzhou. So he's going to talk about our Action Network petition to the Prime Minister to allow Huawei Canada to continue to participate in Canada's 5G rollout. The link to the Action Network petition should be available in the chat. So I'd ask, you can take a moment, just to sign it right now or after this meeting. You can do it while this meeting is going on. Share it with your friends. It's just a link. And the sponsors of the Action Network petition are the following: the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, the Cross Canada Campaign to Free Meng Wanzhou, Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, Canadian Peace Congress, the Canada Files, Mouvement Québécois pour le Pays, Just Peace Advocates, GreenSocialDemocracy.org, Canada-China Council for Cooperation and Development, Regina Peace Council, Kingston Peace Councils, China Solidarity Committee, Mobilization Against War and Occupation, Canada-China Friendship Promotion Association, Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, and these individuals: Charles McFadden, Henry Evans Tenbrink, Mark Hager, Tom Lees, and Shanza Khan. So please go ahead, Ken.
Thank you, Brendan. On October 11th, 2018, the two chairs of the U.S. Select Committee on Intelligence wrote Justin Trudeau a letter. Here's part, quote, "We are concerned about the impact that any decision to include Huawei in Canada's 5G networks will have on both Canadian national security and the Five Eyes joint intelligence cooperation among the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. We hope that you will reconsider Huawei's inclusion in any aspect of Canada's 5G development," end of quote. In effect, Senators Rubio and Wagner were giving their marching orders to Canada. 6 weeks later, on December 1st, 2018, Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou was arrested by the Trudeau government at the Trump administration's request. In his article, quote, "The U.S. war to destroy China's crown jewel and secure U.S. cyber supremacy," end of quote, Canadian author Stephen Gowans argues Huawei was singled out to keep the Chinese high-tech industry in a state of relative underdevelopment. Meng's arrest was followed shortly by the arrest of the two Michaels by the Chinese government for violations of national security laws. In turn, in April 2019, Canadian Public Safety Minister Goodale, in charge of Canada's 5G review, said he intended to reveal his government's decision on whether Huawei should be allowed to continue to participate in the deployment of Canada's 5G network before the federal election later that year. However, he did not, prompting Canadian media giants TELUS and Bell to call upon the federal government to pay them to remove, at a cost of $1 billion, the Huawei equipment already installed in the network, and they looked at other foreign providers such as Ericsson and Nokia with whom to partner. So, during this session of Parliament resuming today, we're told the Trudeau government will announce a final decision on Huawei Canada's participation. We urge the federal government to do the right thing and say yes to Huawei. Our Action Canadian petition, officially launched today, doesn't argue for special consideration for Huawei. It argues against discrimination against this Chinese-based company. The petition has received broad support from among Canada's peace movement and among Chinese Canadian organizations. It lists 10 good reasons to sign. Here are some. 1, Huawei is the world leader in 5G rollout and implementation. Canadians deserve nothing less than the best. 2, Huawei technology is 30% cheaper. Canadians who pay the highest fees for tech products and services in the world deserve a break. 3, despite considerable innuendo about backdoors in Huawei products, there is no evidence that Huawei technology is compromised. On the other hand, US government compels US tech firms routinely to cooperate with its intelligence services to permit US access to its tech products and services. Skipping to 6, Huawei Canada is a good corporate citizen providing 1,600 highly paid jobs in Canada, jobs which are threatened by a governmental ban on Huawei. 7, trade with China increases Canadian prosperity, whereas a ban on Huawei might bring about harmful reprisals. 8, obstructing Huawei sends a signal to the international community that Canada is an unreliable partner, not really interested in free trade and subservient to US interests. 9, arbitrarily excluding Huawei is a violation of World Trade Organization rules. Please see the link in the economic opinion commissioned by us of Dr. Atif Kabursi, world-renowned economist, in the chat after my talk. Finally, 10, the cost of removing Huawei technology is a burden which would have to be borne by Canadian taxpayers or internet users. It makes much more sense to let Huawei continue to remain a partner. We ask you to sign and share this petition today. We are also asking the Prime Minister to show some of the boldness and independence of foreign policy demonstrated by his father, Pierre Elliott, some 52 years ago, when he opened diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. And he ushered in a period of 5 decades of relative prosperity. We asked Justin Trudeau and Cabinet to do what's right for Canada's national interest today, and that is to allow Huawei to continue to participate in Canada's 5G rollout. Thank you for your kind attention.
And thank you for that presentation. And yes, people should check out Dr. Kabursi's writing on that matter. I believe links are being posted, and there is a link that will go to our website. There's a wonderful analysis by Professor Kabursi. So that's great. I encourage people to check that out. And I see there's comments and questions. We will, of course, have a full question and answer period for journalists and others not long from now. So check out and share the Huawei petition, and the link to it is also in the chat and at our website. So the next presenter is William Ging Wee Dare, and he is the author of Being Chinese in Canada, The Struggle for Identity, Redress, and Belonging, which is published by Douglas and McIntyre in March 2019. Now, this book won the 2020 Montreal Arts Council Blue Metropolis Prize for Diversity. William has also recently contributed articles to the Montreal Gazette on the fight against gentrification of Chinatown, as well as articles to the Canada Files to oppose xenophobia and anti-Asian racism. So that's quite a resume, and we're pleased to have you. Go ahead, William.
Thank you, Brendan. I'd like to thank Ken Stone and the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War for organizing this press conference. First of all, I'd like to wish everybody a happy Chinese New Year, Sin Nian Fai Lok, Gong Hei Fa Choi, in my Toisanese dialect. At about the same time as the push to destroy Huawei, another geopolitical pressure point was created by the US to attack the livelihood of a whole region of people in China, the Uyghurs of Xinjiang. The US State Department found fertile ground in a mix of Islamic terrorism and human rights. Sorry about that, there's a phone going on. China had been combating Islamic terrorism since the 1990s. Over 1,000 people were killed by the terrorism. China participated in the war on terror with the US and other Western countries as Uyghur terrorists were being trained by ISIS and Al-Qaeda to stir up the separatist movement in Xinjiang. 22 Uyghur fighters were captured by the Americans and held in Guantanamo as enemy combatants. As the US began to heat up its Cold War rhetoric against China, it weaponized human rights as an easy tactic to gain support from the Western governments, the media, liberal, conservative, and leftist political circles, highlighting the Uyghur separatist movement. The Uyghur genocide claim started with Adrian Zenz, a Christian zealot who is homophobic and also denies the Holocaust. But that didn't stop people from using him as the source on Xinjiang. The U.S. Congress passed the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act in December 2019 based on his dubious research, claiming over 1 million Uyghurs were detained and the forced sterilization of Uyghur women. On his last day in office on March 19th, 2020, Trump's Secretary of State Pompeo unilaterally declared China to be committing genocide against the Uyghurs. However, according to a report in Foreign Policy, legal advisors to the U.S. State Department concluded that there was insufficient evidence of genocide in Xinjiang. This legal opinion was ignored by Pompeo, Biden, and other Western governments. The work of the Canadian Parliamentary Subcommittee on International Human Rights on Xinjiang was driven by the Ottawa-based Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. This tiny Uyghur separatist group was able to bend members of parliament to its will. The URAP is associated with the US-funded World Uyghur Congress. URAP began in May 2020 with a grant from the National Endowment for Democracy, a CIA spun-off agency. The principal and only sources of information for this parliamentary subcommittee to draw its erroneous conclusions was Adrian Zenz and the people associated with the URAP. For an issue as serious as genocide, this subcommittee did not do its homework, nor take due diligence to gather all the facts. There are many people and sources available to contradict the fake theories of Adrian Zenz and the URAP. People like investigative journalist Max Blumenthal, The Gray Zone, and other news outlets have discredited Zenz. None of these people were called to testify. I've put a list of links in the chat for you to get some background information on the Xinjiang situation. An example of undue influence by the URAP on Parliament is the Parliamentary Uyghur Friendship Group. 5 of the 8 members of the Human Rights Subcommittee are members of this friendship group, so they were not impartial. The subcommittee's non-binding resolution, Motion 56, to declare genocide in Xinjiang unanimously passed in Parliament on February 22, 2021. These anti-China activities have cross-party support, including the NDP and the Green. In fact, former Green leader Annamie Paul sided with the Conservatives, calling for a boycott of the Beijing Games and to relocate them to Canada, as if Canada's treatment of the Indigenous peoples did not violate human rights. Another example to show URAP's collusion with MPs is the role played by the Bloc Québécois MP Alexis Brunel-Duceppe, a vice chair of the parliamentary subcommittee. Brunel-Duceppe attended the November 2021 World Uyghur Congress in Prague as a delegate. He proposed a resolution to postpone and relocate the Beijing Olympics, which was unanimously adopted by that Congress. So these are the factual events. The truth within these facts is clouded by geopolitics and the US instigated Cold War against China. The fabrication of evidence and the psychology of manufacturing consent is a well-established strategy developed by the US to demonize its enemies. Remember the weapons of mass destruction? The line used to invade China, from which Iraq has not yet recovered, not China, but to invade Iraq, which Iraq has not yet recovered. We're asking Canadian government not to follow the US, but to develop an independent foreign policy when it comes to China and elsewhere. But today we have the unfortunate conjuncture of the Red Scare along with the xenophobic Yellow Peril to strike fear among the Canadian public. So we urge the Canadian government to repudiate the Conservative Motion 56, declaring Uyghur genocide, which was based on false evidence promoted by a small Uyghur separatist group. Canada should also break with the American Cold War against China and stand with the majority countries of the United Nations to establish a multilateral world order of equality, justice, and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, William. That was excellent. And it touched upon issues that are very serious and very important to us in Hamilton and a lot of the sponsoring organizations. One of those is NATO and the United States' use of propaganda, manufacturing consent to gin up a new Cold War with China. And you've expressed some of that. And I think the National Endowment for Democracy and its funding and promotion of outlets that demonize China and concoct and manufacture lies is being addressed somewhat in our alternative media. If you go to the Canada Files this month, there is an article by Aidan Jonah about the National Endowment for Democracy and its use of money and funding to generate content within Canada and in our political sphere, which is a regular occurrence. So you can also look up Eve Engler's work on how Canada's political parties are all NATO parties here in English Canada. And I strongly encourage people to look into that. With regard to the petition, if anyone is having trouble with the link to the petition, we are going to be posting it, the newsletter on our website today, which has links to all of the petitions and the open letter. So you will be able to get that one way or another today. And William, if you have any articles that you would recommend to our audience, you are, of course, welcome to post them in the chat or talk about them during question period.
Yes, I have done that already.
Yes, excellent. So our final speaker is Radhika Desai. And Radhika is a professor at the Department of Political Studies, director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group, University of Manitoba, Winnipeg, and convener of the International Manifesto Group, as well as president of the Society for Socialist Studies. She writes about politics and political economy and about the changing world order. In 2013, she proposed a historical materialist approach to understanding world affairs in her Geopolitical Economy after US hegemony, globalization, and empire. And we'll be going to Radhika very shortly. But of course, we have this petition going on, the parliamentary petition. This one's sponsored by Matthew Green, MP, Hamilton Centre, and it's condemning this very AUKUS military pact, the one involving the USA, UK, and Australia. So this petition, this parliamentary petition I'm referring to, it came from a motion that was passed at the Hamilton and District Labour Council. And so we're looking to get 500 Canadian signatures on that petition so that Matthew Green can rise in the House and read that petition concerning AUKUS into the record, after which the government is officially obliged to respond within 45 days. So the link to that petition, parliamentary petition AUKUS, should be in the chat and of course will be found at our website. So Radhika has a lot to say on all these issues. So please go ahead, Radhika.
Thanks very much, Brendan, and happy Chinese New Year to everyone. I have been charged with the apparently paradoxical task of talking about one thing, one new agreement, but at the same time putting what we are talking about in a larger picture of what is at stake in the choices Canada makes in the broader world order we find ourselves in today. But it is only apparently paradoxical because, as you will see once, as I've tried to say in my brief remarks, AUKUS, which is the new agreement that I'm talking about, represents the sort of the sharpest edge of the wedge that is leading Canada in the wrong direction in world affairs. And what do I mean by wrong? I mean choosing the absolutely wrong things across a whole range of spheres. Economically, it asks us to choose an increasingly financialized, predatory, speculative, productively enfeebled neoliberalism that is producing more and more unbearable levels of economic, social, and political inequality and deprivation in economies that had been relatively productive versus the more productive economies of the world. I'm not just talking about China, but also many European countries that are less and less willing to go along with the American-led new Cold War against China, precisely because they are oriented differently. Historically, they are oriented towards production and more towards production and less towards finance. So in this sense, the choices that the Canadian government makes are not just about some highfalutin moral principle. It affects our material lives on a daily basis. So let me explain. AUKUS is short for Australia, UK, and US, and it is the name of a trilateral security pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Under it, Australia will receive 8 nuclear-powered submarines in coming decades. Announced on the 15th of September 2021, it involves the US and the UK sharing nuclear propulsion technology with Australia, which some of you may not know, but is the only G20 country in the world which as yet does not even have a civilian nuclear program and therefore does not have nuclear technology. At one level, it is, as former Prime Minister turned political analyst Kevin Rudd termed it, just a defense procurement deal. Such deals are made every day by dozens of countries in the world's $3 trillion defense industry. However, it is also no ordinary deal. It marks a major realignment of international power in at least 3 ways. Most importantly, it sharpens the United States' new Cold War on China, which the Biden administration, as you're all aware, is waging with equal, if not greater zeal than the Trump administration. In an entirely vain effort to conceal the sheer aggressiveness of the deal, President Biden claimed that AUKUS is not directed at China. How likely is it, given that just the previous month, he had authorized the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which unfolded so ignominiously, precisely on the grounds that it would leave the US free to concentrate on strategic competition with China, the current euphemism for the US's new Cold War with that country. And of course, how believable is it, given that it is asking Australia, which has hitherto tried to manage its relationship with China in a more sort of with more compromises, to take a more and more uncompromising and militarily aggressive position precisely against that country with whom it has the deepest economic relations. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison also sought to conceal the U-turn the deal means for Australia, making noises about the increasingly complex environment in which Australia must now act, which necessitates the taking traditional defense cooperation with the United States to a new level. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson simply salivated over the jobs it would create, the few jobs it would create in the United Kingdom. China's President Xi, however, warned against relapsing into the confrontation and division of the Cold War era and against drawing ideological lines or form small circles on geopolitical grounds, instead of being open and inclusive. And as you know, China continues to pursue a diplomacy which is open and inclusive. Victor Gao, once the interpreter for Deng Xiaoping and now heading a prestigious think tank, said that AUKUS represents a gross violation of international law that will have profound consequences for Australians, whom, by the way, he called brainless. That is to say, for taking such a choice. Secondly, an article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has criticized AUKUS for making the proliferation of very sensitive nuclear technology easier, with literally tons of new nuclear materials under loose or no international safeguards. Even the United States Carnegie Endowment for International Peace warned of the negative and serious consequences for AUKUS. It could make Australia the first non-nuclear weapon state to exercise a loophole that allows it to remove nuclear material from the inspection system of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Finally, the third sense in which it marks a major turning point is that AUKUS is both the cause and the consequence of the increasing divide between the United States, Brexit Britain, and their new allies such as Australia and continental Europe on the other. This involves the precipitation of what began to be called the Anglosphere back in the mid-1990s, but is now coming out as a more important reality, essentially because the coalition of Western countries that the United States had put together in the post-war world has even less glue than ever before to make it stick together. The glue is not there. The different parts of the coalition are going in different directions. So now we see the sort of a smaller kernel of that coalition, namely the Anglosphere, coming more openly into view. And what is that Anglosphere? Ultimately, that Anglosphere, as I said, represents the worst kind of capitalist system that you can find. Capitalist system that has very little productive base other than exploiting indigenous land, indigenous resources in settler colonial colonies, which apart from Britain, Australia, Canada, and the United States all are. It involves financial predation and speculation. It involves next to no production. It is now falling technologically behind in all of these ways. And of course, it is creating more and more inequality precisely because it is a financialized system. So on practically every front, ordinary people have nothing to gain from the model the Anglosphere represents. So essentially, the US is compensating for the continental Europeans' reluctance to wage new Cold Wars, whether against China or, as we now see, against Russia, by forming alliances with those like Britain or Australia who are desperate and foolish enough to do so and ruled by narrower elites than practically any other major country. So on the other hand, by shifting these defense procurement from the continent, because you remember when AUKUS was created, the Australians broke their defense procurement deal with France and gave it to the United States and the UK. So by doing these things, AUKUS and other moves will only drive the wedge between the productive parts of the world of economy and its leading powers and the unproductive, speculative, predatory parts. The long-standing trend of continental Europe asserting its own security autonomy will intensify, and because at the end of the day, though they may be more productive, they remain capitalist powers, they will make the international environment more complex, make international tensions more complex and harder to navigate. So I think we all must take a stand and demand that Canada rejects the shrill, baseless, destabilizing rhetoric of countries that are ruled by narrow elites and systems which benefit only these narrow elites, and demand the choice of, essentially demand that Canada choose the path of greater equality, broader prosperity, and away from the inequality and deprivation that we are looking at. And that path lies in having better relations with China. It certainly does not lie in warmongering with China. So I think I'll end there. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Radhika, so much. We were really hoping you would be able to wrap it up, give that kind of global view, and it looks like you've done that. And of course, we will be moving very shortly to the question period. I just received a data point from Aidan Jonah regarding the discussion of his article. the URAP, Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, that was formed, I believe, in 2020. He just wanted to point that out. There's a little blurb. He says, the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project strongly encouraged members of parliament to set up an unofficial parliamentary Uyghur friendship group. And it was launched on URAP's website on February 28, 2020, partway through the subcommittee's term. And you can find that in the articles and research that he's doing in the Canada Files, which I, again, strongly encourage you to check out the article on that organization and the National Endowment for Democracy. William has done a great job of pointing out the importance of these articles. So, we're going to be coming to our question and answer period. Don't forget about those petitions that are floating around in the chat and that are also posted at hcsw.ca and will be in the newsletter posted today. So we've come to the question and answer period, and we have a short list of media persons who have registered for this press conference, and we're going to be giving them the first opportunity to ask questions. Journalists are requested to raise their hands to be recognized, raise their hands using the function of raise hand on Zoom, or just raise your hand. You may be able to submit questions in writing, but we're going to go with the hand raising. The first question is going to go to the official media sponsor of this event, because our official media sponsor is the Canada Files. And Canada Files founder, editor Aidan Jonah should be appearing to ask that question. So let me just check with Allison. Is Aidan Jonah here for the first question?
Yes, he is.
Okay, let's put him on.
Thank you, Brendan. I appreciate the opportunity to ask this question. I want to address my question to William Dare. And obviously, you know full well that the investigations that have done to the National Endowment for Democracy, its influence in Canadian politics, in particular on the parliamentary subcommittee. I want to ask, because also in my reporting, I've also found that a second group, the Center for Law and Democracy, is also taking funds from the National Endowment for Democracy. And I've gotten hints that there very likely are more of these groups taking money. I want to ask, do you think there is a chance that measures could be taken to, say, root out this funding from the National Endowment for Democracy in Canada? And if you believe this is, say, an urgent priority for fighting for a sovereign Canadian foreign policy?
Okay, you can hear me now? Thanks for the question, Aidan. I think, yeah, this group, this loyally sounding group, works pretty closely with the URAP as well. And I'm not sure, maybe you have some information, Aidan, whether they're also funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, the US CIA, I guess, spun-off agency. But nevertheless, yes, it is a dangerous situation for Canadian democracy. And maybe Eve Engler could speak to that as well, to allow foreign powers to influence debates in Parliament, to influence Canadian public opinion. I think Israel has done that for a very long time without anybody, raising objections to that in its suppression of the Palestinian liberation movement. And I think we've seen the same situation with this foreign influence. And I did an article about Kenny Chu, who tried to pass this, I guess, this bill, non-governmental bill. I forgot what the name for that is. But anyway, to have foreign players to register before they can influence Canadian public opinion. So looking at that, I think it would be aimed more at the U.S., at Israel, at the National Endowment for Democracy. Of course, Kenneth Chu proposed this bill as an anti-communist bill to target China, but of course, we could always use it if it does come to fruition, to object to American and other Western imperialist influence on Canadian government, Canadian Parliament, and the Canadian people. Yes, this is a dangerous situation, and the McCarthyism that has been driven by the U.S. Cold War against China, it's becoming more and more dangerous for progressive people. For people within the Chinese Canadian community who raise objections to this influence by the Americans, because anybody who participates in this discussion who do not align themselves with the anti-China narrative are automatically under suspicion. We even have a senator, Canadian senator, Senator Wu, who's come under attack as being a stooge of China because he did not agree to pass a similar resolution to condemn China with respect to the Uyghurs in the Senate. And so we see all these attacks, and if we go back to the beginnings of the COVID pandemic, remember Theresa Tam was attacked. She's the I guess the national chief medical officer, and she was attacked by some conservatives saying that who does she work for, the Chinese government or for Canada? Because she tried to bring up an objective scientific analysis of the pandemic at that time. So you can see how dangerous the situation is becoming if we allow these people to voice their the agenda to limit freedom of discussion, freedom of speech of people who are opposed to the dominant narrative. Thank you.
Very good, very good. And there will be more opportunity for our panelists to go into further detail on this and other questions. I have at least two journalists that are lined up to go ahead. I am told that Yuri Smoter has, yes, he is next in line to ask a question. We'll put him on the mic. So yeah, go ahead, Yuri.
Thank you, Brendan, and a fantastic panel. Thanks to all of you for the great work that you're doing, especially during these very, 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 very troubled times with a possible war in Ukraine, and who knows, maybe even a possible war over Taiwan. And just before I ask my question, it's January 31st, and I just want to say solidarity to the Indigenous people of Australia, who right now are mobilizing and protesting, demanding that Australia cancel Australia Day. They're also fighting against mining projects over there, so I stand in solidarity with them, and Native Lives Matter to them and the ones in Turtle Island. My question to anyone in the panel is if they've been having difficulty in mobilizing the peace movement to end this new Cold War on China and Russia. Because, for example, I know people who would be opposed to a war on Iran, who definitely would have marched against the Iraq war. Yet, for some reason, and I guess this is a credit to the propaganda, they just have this imperial blind spot on Russia and China, and they say that NATO must defend itself against Russian aggression in Ukraine, and they'll recycle all sorts of garbage about China. So I was wondering if anyone in the panel, what should we do about those who claim to be on the left, who are good on some issues, like say Palestine, but are just so propagated on Russia and China? Like, should we continue to try to engage with those people to convince them that this is another BS war, or should we just sort of try to push them aside and strengthen the groups like the Hamilton Coalition, who is consistently anti-imperialist?
looks like we have a few panelists with their mics open. And so if you want to go ahead, we'll just do it in a round robin fashion.
Well, I think that, of course, obviously, one way of dealing with that is to underline certain historical truths. For example, I mean, in a certain sense, those truths may be summed up in the expression, this is what socialism looks like. Of course, socialism has not been achieved in China. It was not achieved in the Soviet Union, nor did the people who were trying to build it ever say that they were trying, doing anything more than building socialism. But there is a sense in which partly because Western, the left in Western countries has historically at least drawn some benefit from imperialism, although my argument has always been that it'll benefit more if it stops supporting imperialism. And nevertheless, partly because of that, partly because there have been many wrong turns, etc., in the Western left's own development, etc., they seem to be completely unable to appreciate it. That if we tomorrow wanted to start building socialism, our experiments will have to learn from what went right and wrong in these other countries. So the point is not to take an uncritically critical view, but take a critically critical, take a more balanced position on these experiments. So that's one thing. But I feel that in part, I would say that this understanding is now becoming, the opposite understanding. That is a truly anti-imperialist understanding is now getting more airing. And the reason it's getting more airing is simply because people are beginning to realize, working people in Canada are beginning to realize that we need to take a different position, that the system is not working, that we have to stop swallowing the lies of, and so I think that now, because ultimately material realities will change ideas. I mean, of course, we should be ready to argue and make the right arguments, but material realities are probably the biggest determinant of what changes ideas. So I think we should continue our efforts, but I think at the present moment we're also being helped by the sort of realities I talked about. Through over 4 decades of imperialism, our economic systems have gone from benefiting a broad section of the population to an ever narrower section of the population.
And is there anyone else on the panel that wants to comment on? I guess that was a broad question and sometimes requires a broad answer. So you're welcome to go ahead.
I don't think there's any simple answer to that of where you spend your time to convince a politician or a public figure or a union leader about versus organizing those who are sort of more. But I think you have to always you deal with the political reality that exists before you. And in our political reality, across the political spectrum of official politics, there is an incredible amount of anti-China sentiment, and we have to deal with that. We have to convince those who are pushing that kind of ideology. I think that one of the ways to convince that is that when people in the House of Commons MPs voted to condemn a Uyghur genocide, what they were really doing was voting to support increased Canadian military spending. That's the concrete result of that vote in the House of Commons. I don't believe that almost any of the MPs have any knowledge about what's going on in Xinjiang one way or the other. They were just doing it because that was the sort of zeitgeist of Canadian political culture. Just like when it was a unanimous vote in the House of Commons to bomb Libya in 2011, it wasn't because there was an assessment of what was actually going on in eastern Libya and what Gaddafi government was doing or not doing, but because there was basically a whole push by the media, by the dominant ideological institutions to do that. So that's the reality that exists. I think that there's lots of ways of poking holes in that ideology. I think that it's absolutely unbelievable to think that the governments that have killed millions of Muslims in a whole bunch of different countries over the past 2 decades have suddenly become the driving force to deal with oppression of Muslims in China. I think that pointing out how the Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC, has not gone along with this whole Uyghur campaign. I think that to go backwards to that previous question about the National Endowment for Democracy funding this campaign within the Canadian Parliament and the Human Rights Committee of the Canadian Parliament. I actually know I was Samir Zuberi, who's the Liberal MP on the Human Rights Committee. He was with me at the Concordia Student Union 20 years ago. He was on the executive at the Concordia Student Union. When we protested Netanyahu in his speaking at Concordia, and I talked to him. I bumped into him at a rally a few months ago. He doesn't know what's going on in Xinjiang. I raised the question. He's somebody who views himself as a Muslim activist and as someone defending Muslim rights, and he's done that. He's worked in that domain for a number of years. He got brought information by, and this is where you see the power of the NED and the funding of the Uyghur rights advocacy project, is that he got brought information that jived with his understanding of Muslims being targeted around the world, and he took up the cause, and then the Globe and Mail quotes him repeatedly on the issue, and so he then gets more standing because he's speaking out on this issue, and that was actually quite unfortunately quite influential on this whole question. When I raised the question of Muslims in India and what the Modi government has been doing around Muslims, he basically didn't know anything about it, and which makes complete sense, right? Because the dominant media, there's not these forces pushing towards, being all concerned about Muslims in India, but there is these, groups funded by the National Endowment for Democracy to be concerned about Chinese treatment. So you see it even at the individual level of an MP, how they sort of get played by the structures in place. But that's just the reality. We have to confront that. We're in a battle. We're in a battle with not only the Globe and Mail and the arms companies. We're also in a battle with this agency of the U.S. government very effectively funding parliamentarians. And how do we push back against that? I think that yes, we need to organize among those who are understand that Canada's imperialist force and is willing to not just buy into the propaganda, but we also have to reach out and challenge and ultimately change the opinion of those who are caught within the ideological and political structures.
I think also William Deere was prepared to answer this question, as far as I can tell from raising his hand. So yeah, William, you can round out the panel on this one.
Yes, I just want to say a couple of words. As Canadian anti-imperialists, we're constantly doing battle with the establishment left here in Canada. It seems like we may agree on some domestic issues of making the rich pay, although that goes no way to overthrowing capitalism. But nevertheless, we're fighting for the poor and the dispossessed and the and people along those lines. But in terms of the international situation, this establishment left lines up with its own ruling class very well. And this is the same situation with China. So what can we do about that? It's going to be a long struggle. I mean, it's the left or the revolutionary left or progressive left or whatever you want to call it, has been doing the battle with social democracy since since World War One, when they lined up with their own imperialist governments to fight the war. I'm glad to see that the Hamilton Coalition is working with Matthew Green to push the petition against Canada's participation in AUKUS. And maybe that's the only thing we can do is take a step-by-step approach, unite with them when we can, where we can unite, and oppose them when they take these pro-imperialist positions, such as condemning China on Xinjiang when they know absolutely nothing about the situation, but they go along with it because that is the dominant narrative, and they're lazy and they just accept and lap up whatever the dominant narrative gives them. So it's an ongoing struggle, and I think we just have to be aware of that. Thank you.
Well, it looks like our panel has handled that question pretty thoroughly. Ken has deferred to the others on that, and they're ready to move on to the next question. So, yeah, I understand we have Helen Lee with us, and if you could just announce what outlet you're with, and yeah, you're free to ask your question to anyone in the panel or the panel itself.
Thank you very much, Brendan. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for organizing this very informative panel. It's a great pleasure for me to attend this event. Thank you very much. And I would like to participate in your further events like this as well. And secondly, I would like to wish everybody a very happy Chinese New Year. And my name is Helen Lee, and I'm the chair of China Solidarity Committee. We have some common goals. So in the future, I would anticipate we will cooperate together to advance our cause. I have a question, maybe a little bit challenging. I address this question to all the panelists here. It seems to me that it's a traditional Western strategy to demonize their competitors or enemies, real enemies or imagined enemies. In this particular case, in the China case, it's imagined because China is not enemy. It's an imagined enemy. But it's a traditional approach from the Western countries to just throw a lot of unfounded allegations toward anybody that they regard as a threaten their world dominance. And it seems like it's very easy to do that. All they need to do is to make a lot of lies, unfounded allegations, and then they sit on the seat of judges to judge other countries. And it's very difficult to debunk these lies because the public is very is not aware. So a lot of public awareness is required to educate the public. In addition to that, these people who make these unfounded allegations, they are not responsible for the consequences that this will cause. So my question is, so in this regard, China is not the first victim and will not be the last victim. If we allow a small fringe minority of Western imperialists to continue with this approach, the world will not have a peace, will not have peace. So my question is, what can we do to prevent such approach in the future? And how can we make them responsible for such unresponsible behaviors? Is there possible we can launch some lawsuit against people who just put a lot of false accusations against innocent people or innocent countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much. And we've opened up our panel's microphones if anyone wants to respond to that.
I mean, I don't mind taking a first brief shot at it. I think, Helen, the problem you are pointing to is a very important one, but I think it has more to do with the structure of our societies, being capitalist societies, being unequal societies, being run in the interest of a tiny elite rather than in the interest of the broad majority of the population. And as a consequence, so the problems you're pointing to are the consequence of that. So if we try to sue anybody, all that will happen is that instead of suing the people who are really driving these accusations and demonizations and so on, we will catch the odd, person who is powerless and has some wrong ideas and nail them, and we won't actually catch the big people, So I think it's very important not to take punitive views and take a very systemic view of what's going on. So historically, if you think about it, Western imperialism has always been justified in the name of, we are doing good, even when they were conducting genocide, when they were oppressing millions and millions of people in their colonies, extracting vast quantities of surpluses from the colonies while people in those colonies were starving, creating famine conditions. That all of this was justified in the name of we in the West are doing fantastic things, and all those poor benighted people are suffering because they can't do any better. And so this sort of demonization is part of the functioning of imperialism. That's what I would say. And of course, it's important to call it out. That's why, the work that we are doing here, particularly people like Eve and others who are, going at the facts and the separation of facts and realities all the time, they are so important. So we have to continue to do that. And eventually, of course, we hope that a larger and larger number of people will agree with us and make it impossible for Canada's elites to do this.
I read this weekend that Huawei is suing the government of Sweden for banning Huawei from participating in normal commercial practice in that country. So maybe Huawei Canada might get some ideas along those lines. But at the same time, maybe the lawyers among us could look into whether we can sue the Parliamentary Subcommittee on Human Rights, to get them to overturn their resolution on so-called genocide in Xinjiang. But having said that, I think in terms of the long run, I've been involved in anti-imperialist work, since my 20s. And that's a long time. In the long run, I think the only thing we can do is organize and speak to as many people as possible, win over as many people as possible to the truth of our situation. So in terms of lawsuits, I mean, this is something as a tactic to mobilize, to inform, and to organize people. But in the long run, we have to do it around ideas, and because when I was involved in the head tax redress movement for 2 decades, we did have a lawsuit against the Canadian government. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court decided not to hear it because the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is not retroactive, and so that didn't get us anywhere. But it did help us mobilize more people in our community, and show that the only way we can win our redress is through the mobilization of the Chinese Canadian community, and that's exactly what happened. Thank you.
Very good, William. In fact, we have a related question. It might be our final media question of the media segment. In the chat, Tina Zhu, who is a journalist with Symbiosis International Media, posed the question. She wanted to know how Chinese Canadians can make the Trudeau government hear their voices. So how can Chinese Canadians make the Trudeau government hear their voices? Does the panel want to address that?
I guess. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
I would say that you answered it in the last exchange, William. There's no shortcut to influencing government and having your voice heard. It's a question of organization. And unfortunately, the Canadian Parliament and political system is more and more ossified and rigid. There was the political parties are more like dictatorships than parties, and not even an individual MP dares to come out and speak against the party's views, which are uniformly, as Eve Engler pointed out, pro-NATO. So if you're going to come out against the US empire in support, or at least in sympathy with China, or with Russia, or with Iran, you are going to find that the party whip comes down quickly on your back. So the political parties don't even allow people like Sven Robinson used to do to come out and make individual statements without being hammered on the head. It's not like the US Congress, and it's not like the British Parliament either, where they MPs have some latitude and some leeway. But the Canadian system is very ossified, regrettably. And we also have the same problem with the Canadian media. It's very difficult to get to squeeze in a word that's contradictory to Canadian foreign policy. You know, it's nice when, for example, Tamara Lorenz gets in an op-ed piece in the Hamilton Spectator today for no war on Russia over Ukraine. But you know that it's the rare exception rather than the rule. However, so I'm saying to Tina and other people from the Chinese Canadian community, thank you very much for showing up, and let's work together. Let's organize, and we will make our voices heard by all the usual traditional methods: lobbying our MPs, petitions, rallies, demonstrations. And the nice thing about having a large community is they vote. And one of the interesting things about Kenny Chu, who accused the Chinese government, imagine this, of interfering in his failed re-election attempt as a Conservative Party MP, was that the Conservative Party, according to my sources, did some polling, and they found that, all our stuff, all our propaganda against China is losing us votes in certain key ridings where there are large Chinese populations, such as Richmond, BC, and Markham, Ontario, and other places. And so they're thinking about that right now, and they're thinking about ratcheting down the rhetoric on China. So there is the opportunity, when you represent a large number of people, of influencing Canada's domestic and foreign policy. And I encourage all the members of the Chinese community who want to see a change to work with us and the other groups that are here sponsoring our petitions and our open letter in order to do so. Thank you very much.
I just want to make a couple of points to Tina. One is that there are very few of us, like yourself and myself, who dare stand up to defend China in this environment and in this atmosphere that we have, especially in the Chinese Canadian community, because many people are intimidated. The media, the government, the politicians, they all give play to the anti-China forces, the organizations to support the democratic movement in China, the organizations to support the so-called violation of human rights in Hong Kong, organizations to support the separatist movement in Xinjiang, and the organizations to support the spiritual Dalai Lama. And so we are in a minority. We are intimidated, but as long as we speak out, we're taking a step forward. But the next step that we have to do is form some kind of an organization. I mean, they have cross-Canada organizations to support the so-called independence of Hong Kong. So maybe we should have a cross country organization to expose the truth.
Yes, that's a good way to wrap up the media question period. And we just have a few minutes, just a few minutes left for open questions from audience members. And it's yeah, in fact, Allison raised her hand first. And so we're gonna open up to general questions. And the first question will be coming from Allison Bodine. Fire this time.
Hi, everyone. This is Allison Bodine from the Fire This Time newspaper. So I can also wrap up the media section and open up the general section. Really a pleasure to be with you all here this morning. And of course, as others have said, Gong Hei Fat Choi, Happy New Year. Happy Chinese New Year to everyone. It's important we recognize that today and recommit ourselves, as with every new year, to continuing this ongoing struggle. It's very exciting to hear William, Tina, and others discuss the possibility of building a stronger Chinese community-based organization to fight against xenophobia, racism, and the lies being told about China. I know people have been working for decades and decades on these important projects, but we need more organizations like that. Canada's awful foreign policy is not new, and I know that many people on this call know that. Canada's foreign policy is based on support and participation in the Cold War against China and Russia today, but this is only one aspect of Canada's anti-human foreign policy. From Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, Canada's heavy and involved participation in many different of the military aspects of those invasions and occupations led by the United States. Canada's continuing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia during an ongoing brutal assault on the people of Yemen that has created the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And now, of course, Canada's all political parties across the spectrum beating the drums of war against Russia and Ukraine. In Latin America, which is also an important area to discuss when it comes to China's role in the world, we have Canada's leading participation in the imperialist wars, sanctions, and attacks on Latin America, including in Venezuela, where they've supported and backed coups, led the Lima Group, which is now falling apart, and participate in sanctions regimes. Whether it's Bolivia or Nicaragua, or many other countries across Latin America and the Caribbean, as Eve mentioned today, Haiti, Canada is following and in line with US policies against the people of Latin America. And so back to China now, because I think looking at that bigger picture, understanding Canada's history in supporting US foreign policies and in having a Canadian foreign policy that is in fact also based on attacking oppressed people around the world. My question is for panelists, if they could just give us a summary of what they think Canada achieves by joining the United States in this new Cold War against China. Considering we've talked about different political aspects, especially today, I know I've heard everyone address this, but really what is the political and economic also gain that the government of Canada sees in joining this new Cold War? Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, panelists. And if you're muted or anything, just let me know.
I think that that's a very interesting question. I think that the Canadian ruling class is quite clearly split on China, and the bulk of the bulk maybe is too strong, but a major segment of Canada is not on board for this. They're not on board. They didn't want Hmong to be detained. They want to trade and invest in China. They see lots of profit-making possibilities. And if you read the business pages, I mean, the Financial Times, for instance, is there's a real battle going on within the titans of global business in the Anglosphere on this question, right? Of the major American banks are still investing in China and still see all kinds of money to be made, at the same time as there's this, this rising conflict. So there's obviously, it's quite obvious that the military-industrial complex benefits from saber rattling. That's quite clear. It's quite clear that within Canada, the forces that are pushing towards conflict with China are CSIS, are the Communication Security Establishment, are the Canadian military. Those agencies are the most tied in to the U.S., right? The Canadian military is just, so tied into the U.S. and sees itself as this sort of part of this global empire, and so that's, I think, where that's driving from. But I think there are real battles going on among powerful players within Canada on this issue, and I think that we need to keep that in mind when we're campaigning on some of these issues, that there actually are, usually some of those sectors of Canadian capital who wouldn't be, be our sort of our enemy, if you like, are, sort of sympathetic to some of our positions. I mean, the telecommunications companies are it's going to cost them, I mean, depending on how if the government subsidizes them, but if they ban Huawei from 5G, that's going to cost TELUS, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I think it's TELUS and Bell, the hundreds into the billions of dollars. So those are some questions, but I think that then you go to the bigger question of like what is the China threat, and I think that I actually sort of disagreed a little bit with one of the things in the press release, was that the idea that Canada ever had good relations with China is a mistake. Canada went to war in Korea in early 1950s, in large part because they didn't like the developments that had happened in China the previous year. And so, yes, there's been different degrees to which how much it's Canada going after China, but for over 20 years we refused to recognize China. We supported China being outside of the UN, and so there's China's a threat at the level that it's the most populous nation that's got its long history, and if you want to rule the world, invariably China's a threat from the perspective of Washington and Ottawa is, or London for that matter, and Ottawa has been totally integrated with the British Empire, the American Empire, and so it sees China as a threat, and China not following along with what Washington wants on different international issues scares the decision makers in Washington. Even while there's many powerful people within the U.S. that want to profit off of a business relationship, the empire objective supersedes those sort of narrow corporate objectives.
I just want to. Sorry,
go ahead, William.
What's next? Just to respond to that point, Canada does not benefit at all from participating in the Cold War against China. In fact, or against China, against Russia, against all the other countries that are under U.S. sanctions. In fact, I think Canada is committing over $200 million to give to Ukraine in order to to fire up the the war propaganda in the Ukraine, and even the Ukrainian government is saying that stop it, stop scaring us with this war propaganda. But Canada keeps doing this. Canada is spending billions of dollars to purchase new warplanes, spending billions of dollars to build new frigates, and so this is what's happening. the peace movement within Canada and throughout the world need to step up and inform the population. You've talked about the Korean War. Yes, we have to explain how a hard war like Korea has cost Canada so much. It was only a few decades of multilateralism that got us out of a Cold War situation or hard war situation when the senior Trudeau recognized China and Chrétien showed some, I guess, backbone by standing up to the Americans when he kept Canada out of the invasion of Iraq. Even at the same time when the spooks of CSIS or whatever it was called at that time, saying that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction and we must go in there with the Americans and clean it up. But Chrétien showed some backbone and said, no, I don't believe that. And so we I guess we saved a few thousand Canadian lives by not going to war in Iraq. Although we did follow the Americans into Afghanistan under Harper, and that cost us a few hundred lives. Just to conclude, we gain absolutely nothing from participating in this Cold War alongside the Americans against China, Russia, Iran, and all the other countries suffering the sanctions from the Americans.
Yeah, if I may just make a few brief points. I mean, I completely agree with William that we as ordinary Canadians gain nothing from these new Cold Wars. So they are clearly being conducted because our countries are led by, controlled by people who do not actually represent us, although we live in a democracy and they claim to represent us. They actually win elections with money drawn from very large donors who then control what happens. This is true in Canada, in the United States, many other places. That's one point. Secondly, I just wanted to make a small clarification about how Canada enjoyed better relations with China before. I think Canada, Western countries generally, particularly the United States, enjoyed good relations with China as long as they could continue to believe that by engaging with China, they were merely encouraging China to convert itself into a neoliberal financialized society like the West. But once that became clear that it was not happening, once it became clear that China had its own ideas about persisting along the socialist path, but engaging only in limited market opening in order to correct certain problems in the economy, then the hostility to China has only grown. I mean, back in 2008, everybody from George Bush to Ben Bernanke tried to blame China for the 2008 crisis. By 2011, Obama had gone into his pivot to Asia. And of course, in the context of the pandemic, when China was doing well, both on the public health front and on the economic front, what does Trump do? Declares essentially a new Cold War on China. So it's interesting to think about this in an analogy with the Soviet Union and the fall of the Soviet Union. Yeltsin was really pally with the West because Yeltsin simply kowtowed to the West. Once there was a leadership in power that said, no, we're not going to do everything the West wants. There has been nothing but hostility between Russia and the US, even though Russia is not even a socialist country. It's a completely capitalist country. So that's the second point. The third point is that I agree totally with Eve that the Canadian capitalist class and also the American capitalist class and the British capitalist class, etc., they are split. They don't, on the one hand, I would say the more productively oriented among them would like to have better relations with China. But on the other hand, we have, remember, a huge section of the capitalist class, which is invested in the military industrial complex, invested in imposing their intellectual property right monopolies and other rentier ways of profiting, which is not. So I would say that this, while they are split, and I think it will help us to the extent they are split, I think that, we have very substantial and influential sections of the capitalist class who have no interest in being friends with China. And third, finally, I'd just like to say that, I really want to support William Deere's point about creating a new organization. Like, I don't know how many of you know, but Richard Sanders has produced an enormous literature on how Canada has tended to encourage the immigration of relatively right-wing minority, like right-wing people from various countries. And so, for example, you may know that for among Ukrainian Canadians, you have a progressive Ukrainian Canadian organizations and right-wing Ukrainian Canadian organizations. And I think in other immigrant communities, you're going to have to do something like that. Let me give you an example, a small example of India, where the overwhelming majority of Indo-Canadian organizations are pretty right-wing and in favor of Modi. So when we wanted to create a support for the farmers' movements in India, for progressive causes, etc., we had to create new organizations. And I think new organizations would be a really big help to allow progressive voices among the Chinese Canadian community to to have their say, to be heard, etc.
Thank you, Radhika. There's a lot of questions like that on people's minds. Now, we do have people who have had to leave us for time constraints, as we're supposed to have ended about 5 minutes ago. However, what I'm going to do is anyone who has to leave for time reasons, please go ahead. It's okay. The official event time is over, but we do have time. It's my understanding to take 2 more questions from general questions for our panelists. And there's nothing after the question, so it's not going to go on and on and on. But we do have time for a couple more questions. And it's my understanding that the first one we have from Madiha Rizvi. She's been waiting patiently to ask her question. And so, yes, if we want to unmute Madiha and put her on the panel, that should be fine.
Greetings, everybody. It's a wonderful session. I'm grateful that I was invited by Jonathan Dye to attend this session. I work with him in Anti-Racism Education Committee, and I'm chairing the Global Alliance Canada org. I work closely with the Government of Canada as well. And the Chinese community, as other communities, is close to my heart. And it was wonderful to see the different aspects that the Chinese community is having problems with the Canadian government. And on the other grounds, how the Chinese community, what the Chinese community is facing in Canada. So I would like to stay a little bit focused, because I can understand that there are power-hungry people who would like to, who have their own Western interests. And of course, then what is happening is there's no proper strategic planning and things are going in different directions, right? And I'm closely working on the Canadian economy as well, and how we can, have less dependency on US. We should have good relationships with the US, and I can understand that the Canadian government is dependent on US. And well, to stay focused on human rights violation, there is no doubt that the power-hungry will always try to, use weaponized things. We cannot deny that there is a human rights violation in China, right? And I feel this is an opportunity for the Canadian Chinese community to take a leadership role and work out on the human rights violation in parallel with the economic restrictions which the government of Canada is putting on China. I believe that the Chinese community can mediate this along with the diplomats very, diplomatically, and in a way where you have an edge. The Chinese community has an edge, right? There are so many Chinese. How many Chinese we have in Canada? There's a lot. There's a lot. And I thanks to the Chinese community, their contribution, what they've done in Canada. And by the way, Happy New Year to you all. So it's all about how we can mediate. If we push people, I don't think we can make them listen to what we have to say, right? We need to be in the boat with them, understand their position, understand their stance, and then go from there. So I would invite the Canadian Chinese community to, step up, address those human rights violations. I am there to address their, economic restrictions. I'll be head on it with the Chinese community, right? And then we can go from there. The human rights violation, it's not about Muslims, it's about human beings, right? We are all humans. So it is about human beings. So there should be no human rights violations globally, right? So I would, put more, focus on how we can, address what the Prime Minister had to take stance for. Fine. Boycotting a Olympic was not that, maybe not something where he should have taken that stance, but it is important that we not compare the economics with human lives, right?
Okay, and that's a big statement. Was there any other question attached to that, or did you just want the panel to kind of respond to?
My question again with the Canadian Chinese community is how we can address and sorting out the economic restrictions along with addressing the human rights violations in China.
Okay, and it looks like there's some responses to that in the chat. So I would encourage you to take a look at the chat. There are some members of the Chinese Canadian community who are providing their contact information, and I think they may want to get in touch and look at solutions and strategies for what you're discussing. So that's great. So thank you for that. And we that might come up again, but we do have a final question from, I think this is from Victor Huo. He has also been waiting. And again, I recommend people look at the chat as people are now responding to Madia's question there. So yes, I think we're going to go to our final question of the day, and that will be from Victor Huo.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks, panel. Thank the speakers. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. This kind of meeting is very, very important for us. And also, I'm very happy to see our different nationalities together and discuss about the potential problems and also the difficulties we have met in current situation. As a Canadian, I've been here for 25 years, and also very care about the relation between China and Canada. As I mentioned, we have had a great relationship between China and Canada since old Justin Trudeau's father, young Trudeau's father. But now the situation is very bad. We're very worried about that. As a Canadian Chinese here, I wish all panels, all speakers, and also joint efforts, we can do something together. As a Canadian, I think we have the responsibility to help the government. Sometimes we think about the government still not very experienced and young, and also quite follow great many the jobs follow up the United States, the United States. I don't think it's good for the Canadian people like us. So my question to all panels, our speakers, how can we find a way to organize it together? How can we speak out, send out our voices to the government, to Justin Trudeau, even though we can meet with him in our holidays, in the activity he wants to get this, the votes. So I don't think it's good. So questions to you too. So how can we find a way to pass our voices, and how can we organize together, start from today on? Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Do we have time, Brendan, to?
Yes, the panelist does have time to address Victor's question.
Okay. Yeah, before I speak to that, Victor, I just want to say something about so-called human rights in China. Western human rights is not something that the Chinese people find to be, I guess, that important, except maybe for a few who have who have bought into Western concepts of democracy, human rights, and and culture and literature. In Xinjiang, yes, there's some repression in Xinjiang because that is an outcome of the terrorism that plagued that region for a couple of decades. And when I was in Xinjiang, I did not see it to be an armed situation, which was very different from when I was in Paris. When I landed in Paris, I see these soldiers, roaming around the airport with automatic rifles. But that's just an anecdote. Yes, there's repression in China against anti-social elements such as terrorists. Their concept of human rights is to have stability and economic development. Because 800 million people being lifted out of poverty over the last few decades is the primary concern. And I think that the Chinese government, that's where it's at, is to look after the day-to-day needs, the human rights of being fed, the human rights of surviving. And that's where they're at right now. And so when you talk about the abstract concepts of democracy and multi-party system, like what we have here, and look at what we have here, where are we right now? Having a multi-party system. One party is as good as another. When the NDP gets into power, they become conservative and vice versa. So that kind of a democracy is not something that the Chinese people are at this time. And so I guess to anti-imperialists, that's just a distraction. It's something that people try to put us on the defensive, but I refuse to be put on the defensive on the issue of human rights, because Canada, United States, and all these other countries that oppress their own people, they have no lessons to give me in terms of international human rights. And again, to the Victor's point, yes, how do we do this? It's a slow process because I have two experiences of this. First is the building an anti-imperialist movement back in the 70s. And the second one, which is, I guess, is more intimate to me, is building the head tax redress movement in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. It took us 22 years to win an apology from the government. And we did not even win a total redress. It was just a partial redress for those who were still alive when Harper assumed power. So all those, the 90% of head taxpayers who passed away before Harper came to power, they got absolutely nothing. Well, I guess except for the apology, but the apology is just words. And so how do we do this? And I think the discussion today, to me, is a very, very important step. Because we need to talk about it. And if we have to, we'll address the whole issue of human rights. But what are they using the human rights for? They want to split Xinjiang from China. They want to split Tibet from China. They want to split Hong Kong from China. And how was human rights in Hong Kong under the British? I think we have a lot more human rights in Hong Kong today than the Hong Kong people ever had under British colonialism. So we need to expose these fallacies. We need to address them, and we cannot shy away from them. Thank you.
Very good. It looks like I'm hearing from the executive that we're running out of time, and there's not going to be any more spoken questions from the audience. I have to wrap things up, but also to address a particular question that came up in chat, and I'll get to that. So first of all, to wrap up, I would like to thank our presenters, Eve Engler, Ken Stone, William Gingwei Dare, and Radhika Desai for their excellent contributions and for fielding all of these questions. So hopefully some of the discussion that happened today makes its way to Parliament in some capacity, that the Trudeau government eventually hears our views and will start to change course on China. Now, we had received a question from Ali Yeravani in chat, and Ali has pointed out the scope of what is being addressed here and the new Cold War, the second Cold War on China and other countries, and how important this is to address. So he was asking, what can people do? What can we do in Canada to address these long-term Cold Wars that are being ginned up here? And obviously, I think an important part of that is to work with the organizations that have been mentioned as the sponsors of today's chat, to look at the Canada files and get the ongoing media coverage about U.S. involvement in this country and in our political landscape, and all the various other media installations. You can start listening to Unusual Sources February 9th, and just talk to the organizers and talk to the people who were in the chat. People were in the chat giving their contact information from some of these groups. We have also to thank for today's event, Allison Bodine, as you saw, from Mawo and from FIRE this time, who helped make this event run smoothly where it would not have otherwise. And of course, you can speak to Allison, and you can speak to Ali Yeravani. You can speak to all of the people who have put themselves forward today. This was a great chat. It's all very exciting, and most people stayed right to the end. So it seems that this is very illuminating and stimulating discussion. And I just remind you that it's all part of an initiative. We have 2 petitions and an open letter. So we hope people read the open letter and circulate it, and that they sign the 2 petitions, the parliamentary petition, and the other one. Those are 2 things that we can do to start things going and to start up new organizations and work with existing ones to finally start addressing the new Cold War with China. So thanks very much. The information from today's conference will be posted as a video on the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War website at hcsw.ca. We might run some of it on the radio Wednesday in Hamilton, 5 to 6 p.m. on 93.3 and elsewhere. So again, thanks everyone for coming. You can contact us via our website in the contact section. If there's any particular information you need, you're welcome to do so, and we will be standing by. So thanks to everyone who helped organize and circulate and promote this meeting. Happy Chinese New Year. It is Tiger Year. And so we'll be seeing you at the next event. So thanks very much.